The moment my father laughed at me in front of everyone, something quiet and permanent shifted inside my chest. It was the kind of laugh that didn't sound joyful at all, sharp at the edges, cutting through the hum of conversation and the crackle of meat on the grill. I remember the smell first. Charcoal and barbecue sauce, sweet and smoky, clinging to the air like a promise of comfort. I remember the plastic folding chairs sinking slightly under my weight. I remember the way my paper plate trembled in my hands. A drop of baked beans sliding toward the edge as if it, too, wanted to escape. "Avery," my father said, loud enough for the whole backyard to hear. "You're 26 years old. Don't you think it's time you either start paying rent or find somewhere else to live?" The words landed heavy, right there between the cooler of sodas and the picnic table covered in a faded red and white cloth. Conversations around us slowed, then stopped. Someone coughed. A kid dropped a hot dog, and all I could think was how strange it was that humiliation didn't feel like fire, it felt like ice. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not then. Before that afternoon, my life had been quiet in a way that didn't draw attention to itself. I worked, I came home, I helped where I could. I had learned, slowly, over years, how to make myself small enough to fit into my father's house without causing ripples. That day at the barbecue was not the beginning of my pain, but it was the moment it became public. I lived with my father, Greg, and his wife Paula, in the same house I'd grown up in until my parents divorced. It was a beige, two-story place with peeling trim and a lawn that always needed mowing. My half-brother Dylan, Paula's son from her first marriage, still had his childhood bedroom there. So did I. Mine smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old books, a narrow space with one window that looked out over the backyard fence. When people hear adult daughter living at home, they imagine laziness, dependence, failure to launch. What they don't see are the quiet exchanges that happen behind closed doors. The envelopes slid across kitchen counters, the bills paid without acknowledgement, the way responsibility settles unevenly on certain shoulders. I worked full-time as a project coordinator at a small logistics company downtown. Nothing glamorous, but steady. Every other Friday, my paycheck hit my account, and by Monday morning, half of it was already gone transferred to cover the mortgage, the utilities, the internet. I paid the electric bill, the water, the car insurance on my father's truck, because his credit wasn't good enough to keep the rate low. When Paula needed help covering groceries, I stepped in. When Dylan's phone bill came due, I covered that too. No one ever called it rent. No one ever thanked me. Greg used to tell people he was letting me save money. Paula would smile tightly and nod along, her hand always resting possessively on his arm. Dylan, 18 and perpetually unemployed, barely noticed. To them, my contributions were invisible, like plumbing behind the walls. Necessary, but not worth mentioning unless something broke. Most mornings, I woke before anyone else. The house had a certain sound at dawn, a low creak in the floorboards, the refrigerator humming, the distant rush of cars on the main road. I made coffee and drank it standing at the counter, scrolling job listings for positions I might someday move up into. I washed dishes left overnight. I took out the trash if it was full. Greg liked to watch the news with the volume turned up too loud, muttering at the screen about politicians and prices. Paula spent her mornings flipping through her phone, sighing loudly about how expensive everything had become. Dylan slept until noon. This was normal. It was not happy, but it was familiar. And familiarity can feel like safety if you don't know anything else. The barbecue was Paula's idea. She said it would be nice for family morale. Greg invited his brother and a few neighbors. Paula made potato salad. Dylan complained about having to help set up chairs. I showed up after work, changed into a clean shirt, and helped carry food outside. I didn't know then that Greg had been drinking since noon. When he stood up from his chair, beer in hand, I thought he was making a toast. Something light, maybe even kind. Instead, he looked straight at me, eyes glassy but focused, and decided right there that it was time to remind everyone who he thought I was. "You know," he said, waving his bottle slightly, "kids these days don't understand responsibility. They think they can live at home forever, eating free food, using electricity, not paying a dime." Paula laughed softly, a sound like agreement wrapped in politeness. I felt my face heat, my ears ringing. I glanced around, waiting for someone, anyone to say something, to correct him, to point out the truth. No one did. "That's not," I started, finally finding my voice. Greg cut me off. "If you're gonna stay under my roof, Avery, you need to start acting like an adult. Rent, or you move out. Simple as that." The word simple echoed in my head, hollow and false. I nodded slowly, because that's what I'd learned to do. Nod, swallow, make myself agreeable. Inside, though, something was already moving quietly. deliberately, like a door unlocking. They didn't know. None of them knew that 3 days earlier, I'd signed papers at a small real estate office across town. That I had keys tucked safely in my purse. That I'd already packed half my things into boxes hidden at a friend's garage. I didn't say a word at the barbecue. I cleaned up plates. I took the trash out. I drove away with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, the echo of Greg's laughter still ringing in my ears. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. And for the first time, the thought didn't scare me at all. I was ready to leave. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the restless, panicked kind of sleeplessness I'd known before. This time, my mind felt clear, almost calm, as if something inside me had finally settled on a decision it had been circling for years. The ceiling fan turned slowly above my bed, its faint clicking sound marking time. I watched the shadows move across the walls of my childhood bedroom and realized I wasn't afraid of leaving it behind. In the morning, I woke before the alarm. The house was quiet, heavy with that early hour stillness that always felt like borrowed time. I showered, dressed, and made coffee the same way I always did. But everything felt slightly different, sharper, more intentional. I folded my towel neatly. I rinsed my mug instead of leaving it in the sink. I walked through the house like someone taking mental photographs. Greg was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in his robe, rubbing his temples. The smell of stale beer lingered faintly around him. He didn't look up when I entered, just grunted something that might have been a greeting. "About yesterday," I said carefully, setting my mug down. He waved a hand. "Don't start, Avery. You know I was right." I nodded again, the habit ingrained. "I've thought about it," I said. "And you're right. I should move out." That made him look up. His eyebrows lifted, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something like satisfaction. "Good," he said. "About time." Paula appeared in the doorway then, already dressed, her hair pulled back tightly. She smiled when she heard our exchange, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "When do you think you'll be able to afford it?" she asked, her tone light, curious in a way that felt invasive. "Soon," I said. "Very soon." They exchanged a look I didn't fully understand at the time, something between disbelief and relief. In their minds, I was bluffing, talking big. They had no reason to think otherwise. I had been quiet for too long. That afternoon, I made a call from my car during my lunch break. I canceled the electric account, set to transfer service to my new address effective immediately. Then the water, the internet. Each call was strangely grounding, like crossing items off a list I'd been writing in my head for years. When I hung up with the insurance company, the agent cheerfully confirmed the cancellation of my father's car policy. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" she asked. "No," I said and meant it. "That's everything. I moved out that weekend. I didn't announce it. I didn't argue. I packed what was left of my belongings while Greg was out running errands and Paula was at work. Dylan was asleep, as usual. His door closed, music faintly thumping through the wall. I left my room cleaner than I'd found it. Bed stripped, surfaces wiped down, trash emptied. Before I left, I paused in the doorway and looked back one last time. It wasn't sadness I felt. It was something closer to gratitude for the lesson, if not the experience. My new house was small, but it was mine. A modest 2-bedroom with creaky floors and a porch that faced a quiet street lined with old trees. The air inside smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I slept on a mattress on the floor the first night, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the unfamiliar hum of a neighborhood that didn't know me yet. For 3 days my phone was silent. Then the messages started. It began with confusion. "Did you do something to the electric?" Greg texted. "The internet's out," Paula wrote an hour later. "Mom says the water isn't working," Dylan chimed in, as if it were a mild inconvenience. I didn't respond right away. I was at work, sitting at my desk, staring at my screen as the phone buzzed again and again. When I finally replied, I kept it simple. I moved out. The accounts were in my name. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. "You can't just do that," Paula wrote. "Fix it," Greg demanded. "This isn't funny," Dylan added. I set the phone face down and finished my workday. When I got home, I made pasta and ate it standing in my own kitchen, the radio playing softly in the background. The sense of peace was so new it felt almost fragile, like it might shatter if I acknowledged it too directly. The next morning, Greg called. His voice was different, tight, controlled, like he was trying very hard not to explode. "We need to talk," he said. "You've made things very difficult here." "I told you I'd move out," I replied evenly. "This is what that looks like." "You're being selfish," he snapped. "You know we rely on that money." The word rely hung between us, heavy and unspoken for years. I took a slow breath. "I've been paying half my paycheck for a long time," I said. You called me out publicly. You told me to leave. There was a pause. Then Paula's voice came on the line, sweetened with false concern. Honey, we didn't mean for you to take it like this. Families help each other. I did help, I said quietly. I still am. By leaving. They didn't like that answer. Over the next few weeks, the tone of their messages shifted from confusion to anger. From anger to panic. Notices arrived. Late fees. The car insurance lapsed, and Greg got pulled over for driving without coverage. The internet never came back on. Dylan complained endlessly, blaming me for his boredom, his inconvenience, his stress. Then the guilt trip started. Your father's blood pressure is up. Paula's having trouble sleeping. We might lose the house. I read every message. I saved every voicemail. I took screenshots and filed them away. Not out of spite, but out of instinct. Something told me to be careful, to be prepared, because when desperation sets in, people reveal sides of themselves you didn't know were there. And my family was just getting started. The first time I felt real fear wasn't when the bills piled up at their house, or when Greg's messages turned sharp and erratic. It was the afternoon I got an alert from my bank, an attempted credit inquiry I hadn't authorized. I was standing in the checkout line at the grocery store, the conveyor belt humming beneath my items, when my phone vibrated in my hand. At first, I thought it was another text from Paula, but when I opened the notification and saw my bank's name, my stomach dropped. We noticed a recent attempt to open a line of credit. If this was not you, please contact us immediately. The cashier asked if I wanted paper or plastic. I stared at her for a second too long before answering. My heart was pounding, loud in my ears, like a warning drum. I stepped outside with my bags and called the number on the back of my card. The air was cold, biting through my sweater, grounding me as I explained the situation to a calm, methodical voice on the other end of the line. The representative confirmed it someone had tried to apply for a credit card using my information. Do you know who might have access to your personal details? She asked. I thought of my father's old filing cabinet in the hallway closet. My birth certificate. My social security card. Documents I'd never bothered to move because I'd trusted the house they were in. Yes, I said quietly. I think I do. That evening, I drove back to the old neighborhood for the first time since moving out. I parked down the street, the porch light of my father's house glowing weakly in the dark. The lawn was overgrown. A stack of unopened mail sat on the front table, visible through the window. Everything looked smaller from a distance. I didn't go inside. I didn't knock. I didn't confront anyone. I waited until the next morning, then called a locksmith and arranged to retrieve my documents legally, with an officer present. Greg didn't say a word while I collected my things, his jaw clenched tight. Paula hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands, eyes darting between me and the uniform. On the drive home, I pulled over and cried for the first time in weeks. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quiet tears sliding down my face as I gripped the steering wheel. Because, whatever else had happened, I never believed my own father would cross that line, that he'd risk my future to save his pride. After that, I stopped answering their calls. Instead, I documented everything. Every voicemail, every text, every notice they forwarded me, asking no, demanding that I fix what I'd broken. I created folders on my laptop, labeled with dates and descriptions. I froze my credit. I filed a police report, not to punish, but to protect myself. The messages grew more frantic. Avery, please. We're family. You owe us. That last one stopped me cold. I owed them. I thought about the years I'd quietly covered expenses, the weekends I'd skipped outings to save money, the nights I'd gone to bed worrying about bills that weren't mine. I thought about the barbecue, the laughter, the way my father had looked at me like I was a burden. And I felt something shift again, not breaking this time, but strengthening. They didn't need my money. They needed control. When the guilt didn't work, the threats came. Greg left a voicemail late one night, his words slurred but sharp. If you don't help us, I'll tell people what you're really like. I'll make sure they know what kind of daughter you are. I saved the file and backed it up twice. Paula tried a different angle. She showed up at my workplace. I was in a meeting when the receptionist knocked softly on the conference room door and whispered my name. There's a woman here asking for you. She says it's urgent. My stomach sank as soon as I saw her standing in the lobby, her coat buttoned crookedly, eyes red-rimmed. She rushed toward me, voice trembling just enough to draw attention. Avery, please, she said. We just need to talk. I kept my voice low. You can't come here. You don't understand, she insisted. The bank. I understand. I interrupted gently but firmly. This isn't the place. People were watching now. A few coworkers pretended not to, their curiosity barely concealed. Paula noticed too. She straightened, wiped her eyes, and nodded stiffly. Call us, she said. before turning and leaving. I didn't. A week later, the foreclosure notice arrived, not at my house, at theirs. Greg forwarded a photo of the envelope. The return address stock and official. His message underneath was short. "This is on you." I stared at the screen for a long time, the weight of it settling over me. I felt sadness. Yes, but also clarity. They had been living beyond their means long before I moved out. I'd just been the buffer, the quiet solution that kept consequences at bay. Now, the truth was finally catching up. The final confrontation came on a gray afternoon, rain misting the air, my porch slick underfoot. I'd just finished planting a row of flowers along the walkway when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I looked up to see Greg's truck pull into my driveway. Paula and Dylan climbed out behind him, their faces drawn, their movements tense. Greg held a folded paper in his hand. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stood. They walked up to my porch together, a unit bound by desperation. "Avery," Greg said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I nodded and stepped aside, opening the door just enough to block the entryway with my body. "I know," I said calmly. "So do I." They stood on my porch like strangers who shared my last name. Rain clung to Greg's jacket, darkening the shoulders. Paula's hair had flattened against her head, strands escaping her careful bun. Dylan shifted his weight from foot to foot, hands buried deep in his hoodie pockets, eyes darting anywhere but at me. The house behind me felt solid, steady wood beneath my feet, a door I could close if I chose to. Greg held up the folded paper. His hand trembled, just slightly. "We're losing the house," he said. The words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded tired, worn thin by repetition. I could tell they'd been said out loud many times before, probably in that same living room where I'd once paid the electric bill and pretended not to notice the cracks in the walls. "I know," I replied. "You sent me the notice." Paula stepped forward, her voice softening, aiming for my chest. "Honey, this has gone too far. Families don't let each other fall like this." I looked at her carefully then, not the version of her I'd tried to please for years, but the woman standing in front of me now. Her eyes were sharp beneath the worry, calculating, still hoping I'd bend. "I didn't make this happen," I said. "I just stopped preventing it." Greg scoffed, a bitter sound. "That's a convenient way to tell yourself you're not responsible." I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out my phone. My fingers didn't shake. "Before we go any further," I said, "I need to be clear about something." They watched me warily. "I've documented everything," I continued. "The messages, the voicemails, the credit inquiry, the visit to my workplace." Dylan's head snapped up. "Credit inquiry?" Paula shot him a look. Quick, sharp, warning. Greg's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't." "I already did," I said. "I froze my credit. I filed a report. I'm protecting myself." The rain picked up, drumming softly against the porch railing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Paula's shoulders sagged, her tone shifting again, this time to desperation. "We raised you," she said. "We put a roof over your head." "You did," I agreed. "And I paid for half of it." Greg laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's rich. You think paying a few bills makes you the hero?" I met his eyes. "No. I think it makes me done being the villain in your story." I stepped inside briefly and returned with an envelope. It was thick, official looking. I held it out between us, letting the rain speckle its surface. "This came by mistake," I said. "They sent it to my address." Greg stared at it, his breath catching. He unfolded the paper slowly, scanning the page. Paula leaned in, her hand flying to her mouth. The foreclosure notice looked heavier in his hands than it had on my phone screen. "Real. Final." Dylan swore under his breath. "You brought us here to rub it in?" Greg asked, his voice cracking. I shook my head. "I brought you here because you came, and because I needed you to see something." I gestured behind me to the porch, the flowers, the quiet street. "This," I said. "This is what happens when I stop sacrificing myself to keep you comfortable." Paula's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time. "What are we supposed to do?" I softened then, not because they deserved saving, but because I deserved peace. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But it won't be by taking from me anymore." Greg's face hardened. Pride flared, wounded and angry. "You think you're better than us now?" I considered the question, the years of weight behind it. "No," I said. "I think I'm free." The word hung there, quiet and undeniable. Greg folded the notice slowly, carefully, as if doing so might make it disappear. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet, not with remorse, but with something closer to grief. "You'll regret this," he said. "One day, when you need us." I stepped back and opened the door fully now, letting the warmth of my house spill out onto the porch. If that day comes, I said, it won't be because I abandoned myself. Paula opened her mouth to speak again, but Dylan touched her arm, shaking his head. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, there was something like understanding in his eyes. They turned and walked back down the driveway, the foreclosure notice clutched tight, the rain swallowing their footsteps. I closed the door gently behind me and leaned my forehead against it, breathing in the quiet. The radio hummed softly from the kitchen. The house smelled like fresh soil and clean air. I wasn't angry. I was finished. In the days that followed, the silence from my family was deafening. No calls, no texts, just the occasional glimpse of Greg's truck idling down the street as I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, letting the morning sun warm my face. It was a different kind of peace, one I hadn't known I could claim. I spent mornings tending to the small garden I'd started, the soil dark and rich beneath my fingertips. The smell of damp earth grounded me. The slow growth of shoots reminding me that healing wasn't instant, it was patient. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects with renewed focus, but I wasn't running anymore. I was building. Every email I sent, every deadline I met, felt like a brick in the foundation of the life I'd carved out. One afternoon, as I was filing paperwork at my desk, my phone buzzed with a message from Dylan. Can we talk? I hesitated. There was no anger, no demand, just a question. A fragile thread reaching out. I replied simply. When? We met at a small cafe, not far from my house. He arrived late, eyes tired but steady. He ordered coffee, then sat across from me without a word. I'm sorry, he said finally. I didn't see how bad things were, until it was too late. His voice was low, tinged with shame. I nodded, sensing the truth beneath the words. You've done more than you ever had to, he continued, and we didn't appreciate it. I took a deep breath. I'm not here to fix everything, Dylan. I'm here to live my life. He looked down at his hands, fingers tapping nervously on the table. Can we start over? Maybe figure out how to be a family, without the debts and the drama? The question hung between us, hopeful but uncertain. I'd like that, I said, but on my terms. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. Fair enough. That night, I thought about the years I'd spent trying to keep peace at home, the way I'd folded myself into roles I didn't want. I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for them, it was for me, too. A way to release the weight and choose freedom. Meanwhile, Paula reached out through a mutual friend, a quiet message filled with tentative regret. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to heal, to rebuild boundaries, to decide what kind of family I was willing to have. Greg, on the other hand, remained distant. His silence spoke volumes. I understood it wasn't my place to chase someone who wasn't ready to face himself. Weeks turned into months. The foreclosure was finalized. The house sold to cover debts. I heard from neighbors that Greg, Paula, and Dylan had moved into a smaller place, struggling but alive. In my own home, I planted tulips along the walkway and painted the walls a soft cream color. I filled my space with light, laughter, and quiet strength. Every night, before I went to bed, I would stand on my porch, breathing in the stillness, feeling the weight lift a little more. I had learned the hardest lesson of all that love without respect is a cage, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, and that in the spaces we create for ourselves, peace can bloom. The news of the foreclosure rippled quietly through the small circle of people who knew my family. It wasn't a headline, but for those who lived near us, it became a whispered topic: the downfall of the house where I'd once lived, the family that had struggled to keep it afloat. I found myself fielding questions from coworkers, neighbors, even casual acquaintances. How are you holding up? Someone asked me gently one afternoon at work. I smiled, careful to keep my voice steady. Better than I expected. The weight of their concern was both comforting and strange. It was a reminder that, even when family falls apart, the world keeps turning, and people care. At the same time, I felt the eyes of my father's side of the family turn toward me with thinly veiled judgment. She left them to fend for themselves, one relative said quietly at a reunion I hadn't been invited to. I didn't respond. I had no desire to defend the years of quiet sacrifice, the nights I stayed up balancing bills, the moments I swallowed pride so they wouldn't fall apart. Instead, I let my actions speak. One evening, a neighbor knocked on my door. Mrs. Larson, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and a warm smile, held a pie wrapped in foil. I heard about everything, she said softly. I just wanted to check on you. I invited her in, and we sat in my living room, the scent of apple and cinnamon filling the air. Sometimes, she said, doing what's right for yourself is the hardest thing, but it's also the bravest. Her words settled into me like a balm. As weeks passed, the tension around my family's situation eased in the community. People began to see me not as the daughter who abandoned ship, but as someone who had taken control of her life. In conversations, I was careful not to speak ill of Greg or Paula. I knew they were flawed, complicated people who had done their best with what they had. But I also knew my own limits. At work, I was offered a promotion, a recognition, not just of my skills, but of my resilience. I accepted with quiet pride. Dylan and I continued to rebuild our relationship, slowly but sincerely. He came to my house sometimes, helping with small repairs, laughing over shared memories. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One afternoon, Paula reached out again, this time with a letter. She apologized for the hurt, the chaos, and the time she hadn't seen me. I wrote back, acknowledging her courage, but setting clear boundaries. Healing was possible, but it had to be mutual. Greg never responded. I understood that some doors close so firmly they may never open again, but that was okay, because I had opened a door for myself, one filled with light, hope, and the possibility of a better future. Living on my own brought more than just space. It gave me the chance to rediscover who I was beneath the weight of old expectations. The small moments added up. Waking without dread, cooking meals that I actually enjoyed, filling my home with music instead of silence. I learned how to be gentle with myself, how to celebrate progress instead of punish failure. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun slip behind the trees, I thought about everything I'd been through. The humiliation, the betrayal, the quiet strength that grew from all the pieces left behind. The scars remained, sure, but they no longer defined me. They were part of my story, proof that I had survived. I realized that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about respect, kindness, and mutual support. It's about choosing to show up, not out of obligation, but because you want to. Forgiving my father and stepmother was harder than I expected. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I had to accept that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing. It meant releasing the bitterness so it wouldn't poison my future. Some days I still feel the pull of old patterns, the need to please, to fix, to carry burdens that aren't mine. But each time, I remind myself, I am worthy of peace. Dylan and I continue to grow, taking one step at a time. Our relationship is no longer defined by the past, but by a shared hope for what's to come. It's imperfect, but it's real. And me? I'm no longer the girl who stayed silent while her father humiliated her. I'm the woman who found her voice, stood her ground, and created a life that reflects her worth. Life is messy, complicated, and sometimes heartbreaking. But in the chaos, we find ourselves. We learn what we're made of, and that is the greatest gift. I've shared my story with you not because I'm proud of the pain, but because sometimes the hardest moments teach us the deepest truths. When the people who are supposed to love us hurt us the most, how do we find the strength to walk away? How do we hold on to our dignity without burning bridges that may one day heal? I found my answer in choosing peace over pain, freedom over fear, and myself over silence. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you loved even when it broke your heart? How did you find your strength? Tell me your story in the comments. Let's hold space for each other here. And if this story touched you, please subscribe and support this channel, so we can continue sharing stories that remind us we're not alone. Until next time, take care of yourself. You're worthy of kindness, love, and peace.